Thank you so much for having me. I am going to share my screen if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right, you should be able to see my screen now, and I will get started. Great. Well, I really appreciate I appreciate you guys hopping in and spending a few minutes with me today. We are going to be talking about the 1040 review process and how to remove that reviewer bottleneck. I've been working with firms for years, and that is just a theme I hear in about every meeting. So we're going to be focused in on that today. And before we get started, I want to bring up a concept that gets a little prickly with accountants. Matter of fact, it gets a little prickly with just about everybody, including myself, and that is the word change. And unfortunately, that is just something we have to embrace in this industry right now. We have to embrace a transformation, hence the virtual conference we're in today. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So as we get started, before we really dive into the review process, I really love this quote. One reason people resist change is because they focus on what they have to give up. Isn't that so true? Think about making a change. If you move, you have to pack up your house. There's pain associated with that. If you introduce a new technology in your firm, there's training, there's people who aren't going to like it. But instead, if you focus on what there is to gain, that is a good mindset shift. And mindset shift is going to be kind of key to what we're talking about today. A couple examples that I like to use here are the old Blockbuster. It used to be a household name, right? I can't remember the last time I went in there to exchange VHS tapes, which also no longer exist, or a BlackBerry. I was the biggest proponent of BlackBerries for so long. I went through a couple of them, loved it, thought it was the coolest thing since peanut butter and jelly. Then all of a sudden there was iPhones and Androids. And guess what? They were evolving. They were keeping up with what my needs were. And so I don't have a BlackBerry anymore. But a couple of companies I like to use as examples of companies that have embraced transformation and successfully evolved are Netflix. It's a household name. I guarantee there isn't a person on this call that doesn't know who Netflix is, right? And then in our industry, I think it's really fascinating, EY Tax Chat, what they've done. If you haven't heard of it, you can check it out. It's an app you can download on your phone that EY has created. The idea there, I believe, is to do sort of a land grab on 1040s, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? Because here we are in the midst of this transformation from compliance to advisory. So why in the world would you want all these 1040s? Well, if you think about where it's at, it's on your phone. And over half of Americans are millennials or younger today. So think about that. Let that soak in for a minute. And then if we isolate that down to millennials, over 60% of them identify as entrepreneurs. And it's expected that even a higher percentage of Gen Z will be the same way. Well, guess what? They all have these small businesses. Where are they at? They're on their phones. And so this is a really smart way for EY to try and get to these people and help them do business the way they want to. So I just show you that because it's an example, it's a clever, creative example of a firm evolving.
Can you share your screen again, please? Try sharing your screen again. We want to see it, yeah.
I thought I was, so sorry about that. Here, bear with me.
No worries.
Okay.
Yes, there we go.
So are you seeing?
We see it.
My presentation?
Go into presenter view now.
Yeah, I know. Let's see here. There you go. Now can you see it?
We can see it.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's
no worries.
So you missed what I was talking about. Here's the logos. I'm so sorry. Okay. So there's the logos that I was just talking about in the quote, probably one of my very favorite quotes. And so before we really get too deep into this, you guys had a chance to get a break and come back from having a little bit of lunch. I want to think about, why are you here watching this session today? There are a couple of reasons, and I would probably think it's a combination of all, but are you here to think about, how do I just increase the efficiency around the entire review process and do high quality reviews in a shorter amount of time? Or do I have that bottleneck in my firm that she's talking about? And how do I get rid of that? Or are you in the middle of trying to embrace this whole transformation from compliance to advisory services, and you're just kind of soaking up best practices and guidance? Or are you here to think about quality control and just being confident that every return you deliver is right? Or lastly, are you thinking about what's the right strategy for reclaiming time that you could use on recruiting or building your culture or marketing advisory services? I would guess it's probably a little bit of all of the above. All right, so we're going to talk about this messy middle. I like to call it the messy middle. Inside the 1040 workflow, you'll see what I like to refer to as the messy middle, which is the review process. So if you think about the workflow of a 1040 tax return, you have essentially 3 segments. You've got the preparation, the review, and the delivery to the client, right? If we want to really simplify it. So the preparation, if you think about how you can get that off your plate, you can spend no time on preparation if you want to, because you could do things like outsource it to a firm like Entigrity. There are firms that, scan and auto-populate. So there's technology available to make that a really short part of the process. And then on the back end of it, you've got delivery, you've got things like portals and client collaborative technology that makes that process so easy. But that review process, the reason that I have that telephone there is because I like to say that since the dawn of tax time, technology really hasn't addressed this part of the process. We're still ticking and tying. We're still using checklists that we've evolved throughout the years, right? And what's really interesting, if you look at that phone, that was pretty standard back when I had my first internship with Deloitte way back many years ago. And we were ticking and tying and reviewing returns the same way that we do today, essentially. But look how much our technology has advanced. So if we think about this review process, it really is the most time-consuming part of the entire workflow for a 1040 return. And what are you dealing with in there? Why is it so time-consuming? Think about the mistakes, right? You've got preparers that make the same mistakes over and over again sometimes, or just basic, honest mistakes, of course. Sometimes you get to a review and you find out, oh my goodness, I'm missing this document and I've had this stuff in here 2 weeks, 3 weeks now. Typically, it does tend to be a bottleneck in most firms. And honestly, there's a huge shortage of talent out there. You heard Sean talk about it, for others talk about it. And when you think about how we review, we're essentially just double checking those inputs via ticking and tying and calculator tapes. That's pretty mundane. Think about when you were in high school, your 11th grade math test, and your teacher reminded you to double check it before you turned it in. And I would do that and be like, yes, I know it's right. And I would still get it back. And maybe it was a 96%. That happens, right? So it's just a very time-consuming process. So at the top of that review process, what we have to think about is, in the middle of this shift from compliance to advisory, how can we kind of eliminate some of the time that's in there and turn that process around? So if we think about the transformation that we're in the middle of right now as firms, I'm going to step away from the review specific stuff for just a moment. How are we evolving? What's going on in our environment? Now we have to look forward instead of backwards. Our clients' needs have evolved, right? They don't need BlackBerries anymore. They don't need just tax returns. They need proactive advice. But in addition to our clients' needs changing, there's a pretty big culture shift going on in corporate America and just in the accounting profession, right? So think about what the pandemic has done. There's been some reference to that. Overnight, a profession that was very much based brick and mortar had to go home and figure out how to manage their staff virtually. And there's what's called the tsunami effect coming out of the pandemic, where there's this massive turnover expected. I've seen numbers 25%. I've seen numbers of all the way up to like over 50% turnover across all industries expected post-pandemic. Why is that? Because, several reasons, but 2 of the biggest reasons are people got to work from home and they're like, wow, this is great. I don't have to commute an hour out of every day anymore. Maybe I want to work for a firm that allows me to work from home. Or maybe they really did some soul searching, reevaluated their skill set, so they want to do something else. So we have to be able to be prepared to deal with turnover. And then, my goodness, think about this part of the cultural shift. Back when that black telephone was sitting on someone's desk, the rotary dial I had in the picture, at that point, you'd be hiring resources that are 10 miles away inside your own town. Now look at it. You can go out of state. You can go offshore. You can have your tax returns done offshore completely. So access to global resources has really changed the way that we do business in the accounting profession. And then the other thing that I think is often overlooked is, as we move into these advisory services, we're not counting on referrals as much anymore, right? You did a good job on someone's tax return and they're going to refer their sister or mother or friend or neighbor, whatever. It doesn't work like that with advisory services. It involves some cross-selling and some selling of those services, which is a skill set that accountants didn't go to school to be salespeople. So it's something else that we have to learn how to adapt to. I mentioned the talent shortage. That is something that we really struggle with amidst this transformation from compliance to advisory services. Everyone's looking for reviewers or for people with 5 years or 7 years of tax experience, right? And then the technology, holy cow, the technology. Has that changed in the last 10 to 15 years? The noise, how do you determine what technology makes sense for your firm and automation? I think that it makes a lot of sense to leverage technology as long as it advances your firm's vision. So it all kind of comes back to that. But at the end of the day, moving forward is just, you're required to embrace change to really make that move forward in this industry. All right, so there's been, I work with a lot of firms, and oftentimes I will ask them, so, what's one of your biggest initiatives in the next couple of years? And I always hear, well, we're trying to kind of navigate that transformation. A lot of firms just don't really know what steps to take. One of the biggest steps is in that review process, again, where we just spend too much time. So I want to kind of get you thinking about the opportunity cost here. And I don't know if you've gone through this exercise. I talk to firms who have, and I talk to firms who have not. But how many collective hours are you spending at the partner and the manager level reviewing tax returns in a season? It's a lot of hours. And that's also a lot of expensive time because those are the highest billing rates in your firm. The other piece of this opportunity cost that I find really interesting is in mistakes. And I don't know if how many of you guys have ever heard of the 110-100 rule. Essentially, it's the cost of quality. And so what it means is prevention is less costly than fixing mistake, which is less costly in turn than failure. So if you put that in the context of your firm, it is a lot less expensive to spend $1 preventing a mistake than it is to spend $10 of a partner or manager's time correcting it. And even more expensive if you lose the client altogether, right? Or have to absorb time from, because of doing an amendment based on a mistake or what have you. So there's a real opportunity cost to consider here that goes along with the review process. So again, it kind of comes back to a mindset shift, and we're going to get here into the nitty-gritty here in a moment, but really to successfully transition your firm to advisory services, to advisory and consulting services, you have to be open to a mindset shift, not just the mindset shift to adapt to what we were talking about before, but also to thinking about the review process is not a necessary evil anymore. Thinking about it as, how can I change that to pare down the time so I'm not spending time doing detailed review as a partner or manager? How can I turn that process into a revenue generating advisory opportunity? And we're going to talk about exactly how to do that here in a moment. But let's start with a polling question. Chris, can we do that? Do you put that up on the screen or do I? There we go.
I got it.
All right. So before we can even go anywhere with review, we need to talk about preparation. So we'll be talking about that. But I'm curious, there's really only 3 ways to get a tax return done, right? You can hand key it in, you can scan and auto-populate, or you can outsource it. And I'm really curious where this crowd is with that. All right. We got a lot of people who are still hand keying in. And this is an area that you can really save a lot of time. I like that I'm seeing 20s in the 20s for outsourcing. That's fantastic. And then we've got a good chunk of firms here. All right, I think we are done. Okay, so it looks like most people, over 50%, are still hand keying in, right? And then we've got a small chunk scanning and auto-populating, and a quarter of the crowd that is outsourcing, which is good to see. All right. All right. So before we can really talk about the review, we have to talk about the beginning of the process. You can't start at the messy middle. We have to talk about preparation, where it starts, which is why I just asked that question. For those of you who are hand keying in, it is absolutely best practice to either outsource it or find a way to automate it, scan, auto-populate as much as you can. Some of the things that I often see in a tax preparation, tax department, there is a trend towards automation. And I've talked to firms who are like, oh, you were doing the no-touch tax return or paperless. Well, that's great, but you've got to be a little bit careful of that as well, because you can go from a no-touch to a lost touch if there's no opportunity for your junior accountants, your newer, less experienced folks to learn the tax code. And we're going to talk about that. The other thing that you're faced with in tax preparation, especially during tax season, I'm sure you all have experienced this, the inevitable I quit. The person who doesn't show up on January 1st 1st when they're supposed to, or the person who quits mid-February, mid-March. It happens. You've got to be prepared for that. And then a frustration that renews every year at tax time are just the errors. You know, as a final reviewer, as a partner, as a manager, oh my goodness, I'm sure you see the same errors over and over again. And it's frustrating to take that time of yours, again, that $10 time, to have to fix those things. And then I would bet that most of you who are on here have a lot of experience. It could be 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years in accounting. How do you take that level of wisdom and impart that down to the newer generation that's coming into your firm? So we're going to talk about that. One of my colleagues loves to use the term button up, and I love it too. And so what you have to do first, before we can tackle any part of the review, is button up your preparation process. So how do you do that? One, again, it's a mindset shift. When you hire someone into your firm, hire them to be reviewers. Don't hire someone in to come in and be a preparer. We're going to talk more about how you do that. But you're hiring people in for culture. The people that you're hiring right now, by and large, are going to be millennials and maybe some Gen Zs. Again, that's the majority of the workforce right now. And if you hire them for culture, you have a better chance of retaining them. What do those people want? What do the millennials and the Gen Zs, what's important to that generation? They want meaningful work. They don't want to just put numbers in boxes. They really want to understand that tax code. And they also want to advise clients and to, again, have meaning to the client as a trusted advisor. It's important for them to also have work-life balance. Those 90-hour work weeks are just not a badge of courage for that generation, as you guys all know. And then, of course, flexibility. Basically, after this pandemic, as we're coming out of it, the work from home, it's real. And so determining what sort of a hybrid, if you're going to do a hybrid, is very, very important. The other thing that you can do to really button up your preparation is leverage an offshore team like Entigrity. It makes a lot of sense to leverage a resource, as Sean alluded to earlier, beginning with a junior resource to do the basic preparation. And I'm going to show you how, if you do that, that you can then upskill your preparers or junior accountants in your firm to very quickly become reviewers. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of 1040 reviews. Keep in mind my favorite 2 words, mindset shift. It's a 2-step process. Basically, what you're going to do in step 1 is you're going to shift accountability downstream. All right, so we are going to turn your preparers into reviewers. Why? Because again, they want meaningfulness in their work. They want to be critical thinkers and advisors. And frankly, that's what you need in order to meet client needs and to have, you know, higher billing values for your firm and to transition. You also, if you turn your most junior preparers into reviewers, you get a better product on your desk. You're not fixing errors and doing all of the back and forth. Instead, you're gaining capacity that can be redirected to more profitable activities for you. That sounds so fantastic, right? Like there's a magic wand or something. There kind of is, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. So how do you do that? You start with setting an expectation. And that expectation is basically no errors. So you don't want to be correcting errors or writing up review notes about errors at your level. Instead, ideally, when you get a tax return, the only thing you should have to do is open up that tax return and see if there's an advisory opportunity or focus on that advisory opportunity, the story that's inside the return. You know why? Because that's what the customer cares about. And that's the most important thing. By the time it gets to you, you need assurance that it's right. I don't need to tick and tie and double check. But all I want to do is focus on any planning opportunities or advisory conversations that could be revenue generating for me inside this return. All right. So if you set a new expectation as a rule in your firm for 0 errors, is that even possible? Is that easier said than done? No, not really. And we're going to find out how. But let's do polling question number 2 right now, Chris, if we can. And I have 3 polling questions I thought I would throw out there at you today. In this one, I wanted to find out who does the 1040 reviews. We see a lot of, I'm starting to see a trend towards preparers reviewing other preparers. So peer preparer reviews, super, super popular right now. A lot of firms have that first level review. And then of course, there are some firms where the preparer is just responsible for checking their own work and then it goes on for final review. And some firms where the partner is actually doing that detailed review. So I'm really interested to see where you guys fall. Looks like most of them, the partner's reviewing after the preparer finishes preparation. Okay. Very interesting. All right. Looks like we've got about 15 seconds here. Oh, okay, good. All right. So you guys should be able to see that. Looks like almost 50% partners reviewing after the preparer finishes preparation. Then the next, you've got preparers checking each other's work. That is an absolutely great best practice. Okay, let's see. All right, let me get out of that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about step 2. Let's see. Step 2 in our 2-step process. So how do you actually get these preparers or junior accountants to become reviewers? You create an independent expectation of the return, okay? So this is why it makes a lot of sense to outsource the preparation or to use some sort of an automation, because if you have that part done, then you can turn your less experienced accountants into the people that review that work, right? So you create an independent expectation of the return. There's no ticking, there's no tying, there's no recalculating. So how do you do that? There are a lot of firms out there I talk to that have built spreadsheets, and they will have the return done in their tax software just as they always do. And then they'll drop in the totals that affect the results of the return into a spreadsheet. You can do that. There's homegrown ways to do that. But you can also, TaxExact is a tool. It's a cloud-based tool that is also an independent expectation. But ideally what you do is create this independent expectation, and then you match up the results from the independent expectation on that summary page or summary screen over to the tax software's summary screen. And you can immediately isolate if there are any changes or any errors or discrepancies in what needs to be addressed at that level. It can be fixed, and errors can be, discrepancies can be alleviated, and you can approve it. And then once it goes on to final review, if there's been an independent expectation used, that final reviewer has assurance that the return is right. So they don't need to stop and do a double check of all the inputs or tick and tie or worry about accuracy. Instead, their time and their focus is less, because all they have to do is focus on the story that's inside the return. So you get rid of that bottleneck. All right, so let me tell you about TaxExact for just a quick minute and how that does work. So TaxExact is a cloud-based tool, and it was actually designed to transform the review process, because what it is, it's an independent expectation. So for example, you might have Entigrity preparing your tax returns, or maybe you're preparing them, or you're scanning and auto-populating. However you get your tax returns prepared today would not change. What you would do is you would use a tool like TaxExact to recreate that independent expectation. So you're taking a very abbreviated version, just the numbers that factor into the final result of the tax return, and you're dropping them in this tool instead of ticking and tying. And then you're going back to the summary page, like I said, and you're verifying. It immediately isolates errors. But the best part about it is that it trains your newer accountants on the tax code. As an example, I work with a firm that hired a brand new accountant out of college, accounting degree, sharp guy, sitting for his CPA, had never seen a tax form before, and that's not unusual for kids coming out of college, right? And they started him in just doing tax returns in their tax software. I believe they use Listserv. 3 months in, they said, okay, we want him to start double checking his work, or others' work in TaxExact. I had the opportunity to talk to him a day into it, and he's like, oh my goodness, I learned more using this in 1 day than I did in 3 months using our tax software. Because if there is a discrepancy, that preparer is challenged to figure out, what did I do wrong? Did I make a simple error? Did I make a more difficult error? And most of those things can be resolved before they ever get to your level. So instead of, let's see here. So instead of worrying about hiring people who have experience, or hiring reviewers, because it seems like after tax season every year, everybody wants to hire reviewers, you can really focus on hiring for culture. But let's kind of take a quick step forward here and think about what your transformation could look like if you button up that preparation process and then transform your review process. So you might have an offshore team that's doing data input as part of the preparation. Makes total sense. Maybe you're scanning and auto-populating, maybe a combination of the two. And now you've got accountants, maybe your newer, your junior accountants that are really focused on the review. And they're doing that initial review, and they're using technology that taps into the critical thinking parts of their brain where that you can't automate. And as a final reviewer, by the time it gets to you, you're not having to do that detailed review anymore. All you're doing, you're focused on advisory opportunities. Talk about transformation. And again, instead of worrying about hiring reviewers or experienced accountants, you're focused on hiring for culture. And so your time is spent solving problems for clients that propel them and their business forward. I have one last polling question, Chris, and then I will wrap up for you guys. If we could throw that one up there, that would be awesome.
We only had 2 for you today, so you can skip this one.
All right, absolutely, no problem. Okay, well then what I'd like to invite everybody to do is, first of all, we're on Facebook, TaxExact for Accountants, and of course LinkedIn and Twitter as TaxExact1. So wherever you are, please follow us. But for all the participants of Transformation 2021, we're offering free access to 2020 1040 returns with a purchase equal to or greater than that amount for 2021 returns. So you can learn more by going out here to taxexact.com and requesting a demo. And at taxexact.com, there's a green button right on the homepage, right up front. It says request a demo. And if you click that button, it will come straight to our team, and we can give you a more detailed look at what the tool might be able to do for your practice and make sure that you're able to take advantage of our free offer for Transformation 2021 participants. So with that, I think we are about at the end of our time. Did we have any questions out there at all, Chris? Oh, somebody did have one. Yes. Yeah. Looks like somebody already answered it. Yes, it is agnostic. That's an awesome question. It doesn't matter what tax software you use. So if you're using Access Tax, you're using UltraTax, Lacert, Drake, it doesn't matter. This will work with any tax software. It does not e-file. Let's see, someone else asked, does TaxExact also file tax if it's Canadian? This is just for US 1040s right now. We will be expanding beyond 1040s and hopefully beyond the US, but for right now, this is where we feel like we can have a big impact in that review process. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone here today, and look forward to connecting with you guys on social media. Is it only manual entry? It is, there is data that's imported, so we could show you a little bit more in a demo. So Dennis, if you wouldn't mind, just go out there to schedule a demo and we can show you exactly how the information gets into TaxExact, okay? All right.